Vladimir Putin has officially refused negotiations, and the Kremlin publicly calls the war against Ukraine a must-win for Russians at any cost. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov started acting up and stated that Putin is ready for negotiations, but he will not leave Russia for these talks. They say if Zelensky wants talks, he should go to Moscow. The Kremlin also said it's not the right time for negotiations. But Zelensky said that Putin, like a mangy rat, is simply afraid to sit at the same negotiating table with him and look him in the eye. Because as it turned out, Putin was even offered Kazakhstan as a meeting place, but he was afraid to fly there too. But there is an explanation for such behavior. Putin wants to keep fighting because right after the war ends, there is a real risk for him to lose power, or even his life. And in this episode, I'll explain why. My name is Alexei Pechi. Today is September 24th. And before we start this episode, I want to remind you that on this YouTube channel, we cover different news every day so you can stay up to date with absolutely everything. That's why I recommend subscribing to this YouTube channel and ask you to like this episode. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation using the links and details in the description of this video. It says there, support the YouTube channel, Alexei Pechi. Choose any method that's convenient for you. I will be grateful for any support. So today the Kremlin made another statement about the war against Ukraine. In Moscow they called the current stage the most critical and fateful for the Russian Federation, and that the aggressor country must win this war. This was stated by the spokesman for the Russian dictator Dmitry Peskov. And he presents the war to Russians as a struggle for the future, supposedly for the sake of their children and grandchildren, even though no one attacked their country. But let me quote Peskov. Listen, there is a war going on. What is happening around us is war. Right now is the most intense stage of this war. It is quite fateful. We need to win it for the sake of our children, for the sake of our grandchildren, for their future. Here I would like to remind you that since February 24, 2022, the Russian authorities have officially called the large-scale invasion of Ukraine a special military operation. People in Russia were once persecuted, jailed, and beaten for using the word war. At the same time, recently there have been more and more statements coming from the Kremlin where they talk not about the special military operation, but specifically about the war. For ordinary Russians, saying war means prison, but for Peskov and others like him, it doesn't. Be careful, don't get it mixed up. And against this backdrop, during his speech at the United Nations General Assembly, Zelensky said that Putin is deliberately and cowardly avoiding any negotiations with him. Quote, "The representative of Russia is present here, but of course not the one who actually makes the real decisions. This man is too afraid to face Ukraine and the world and admit he only wants war. Russia uses its veto power in the United Nations Security Council solely to prolong the war and continue the killings. The Kremlin isn't seeking peace but looking for ways to continue its aggression." Zelensky said, "True security guarantees for Ukraine should be a line Russia can never cross again." Zelensky also urges the United States, United Kingdom, France, and China to act together as one. According to him, only the united voice of the world community is capable of forcing Russia to stop the war. The president of Ukraine noted that China has leverage over the Kremlin, and Russia in turn is afraid of the United States. Quote, "Be an effective force, act together, unite to stop Russia's war. We know how to guarantee security. Now we need a strong push to make Russia move towards peace." Well, after this statement, the Kremlin tried to make excuses. Peskov stated that a meeting between Putin and Zelensky without prior preparation is just a public relations stunt that is supposedly doomed to fail. Well, of course, the Kremlin representative didn't forget to remind everyone about the previous absurd proposal from the president of Ukraine to come to Moscow. And as this creature named Peskov stated, quote, "Why not come if you're open to dialogue? Let me rephrase, your balding dictator Putin, why doesn't he go somewhere for negotiations if he's open to dialogue?" In the Kremlin, they claim Putin is open to dialogue after years of war. If that's true, why is he, excuse my language, too afraid to leave his bunker? Peskov should have stayed quiet, but the Russian herd will accept this too. The thing is, it turns out that the balding dictator Vladimir Putin was offered to hold negotiations in Kazakhstan, not even in Europe. President Tokayev of that country confirmed this. But Putin is so scared that he was even afraid to fly there for negotiations. The proposal was made by the teams of Zelensky, United States President Donald Trump, European leaders like President Emmanuel Macron, and Turkish President Recep Erdogan. They all told Putin, let's negotiate, even in Kazakhstan if you want. Putin was later offered meetings with Zelensky in Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Europe, and neutral countries like Austria or Switzerland. But the Kremlin categorically refused to send their dictator Putin anywhere. So Putin is just a coward. He's just a coward who hides in Moscow and barks at the whole world from there. Well, it's just sad that the world can't get rid of this filth named Vladimir Putin. But now even Trump has become bad in the Kremlin, so they kind of don't want to negotiate with him either. United States President Donald Trump's claim of a possible Ukrainian victory in the war is linked to his talks with Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky. The Russian president's press secretary Dmitry Peskov stated this. Quote, yesterday there was a meeting between them. Of course, Mr. Trump heard about what is happening from Zelensky's version. And apparently at that moment, this version became the reason for the assessment we heard. But the main drunkard of Russia and deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, Dmytro Medvedev, said that Trump is not like that. It's Zelensky, he brainwashed him, and Trump will definitely come back in a couple of days. But in the end, I want to add an important thought about the dictator Putin. For him, the war against Ukraine is an existential war. For him personally. After all, after it ends, he will probably lose power. Or he will face the impossible task of explaining and healing the nation, which even his autocracy won't be able to handle. He needs to present these soldiers' mothers, the veterans of Russia, with some kind of victory, one so convincing that their grief will be eased. Otherwise, Putin must continue the conflict until his rule or life ends. So that he doesn't have to explain later even to these unwashed Russians that there was no victory, that Russia lost hundreds of thousands, and that the war destroyed the economy and drove the country into poverty. And all for what? It's unclear. It sounds sad, but Russia is a country capable of enduring even several million casualties. The Russians themselves are ready to live in poverty because of the war, they're ready, and Moscow is still enduring this economic pain. And when it becomes unbearable, China, its main sponsor, will probably find a way to help. And that's the sad part of this situation. Finally, I'll add one more thought about Donald Trump that really struck me. Yesterday on social media, Trump basically admitted to his own ignorance. After these 9 months of peacekeeping efforts, Trump's quote, after understanding the military and economic situation between Ukraine and Russia, I believe Ukraine can win and Russia's economy will halt. One question. And for all 9 months of his second presidential term, Trump didn't know or see anything. So what was he doing? You know, after 9 months of peacekeeping efforts, to say that when I found out and fully understood the military and economic situation, it sounds ridiculous. It sounds extremely sad for the leader of a country who was once called the leader of the free world. But I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's it for now. Take care. Goodbye all.